This is Mark Latine, the Bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of Alaska. Welcome to this video training on the Doctrine of Discovery. This is a two-part series of a video presentation made by the Rev.Dr. Mary Crist, the Indigenous Theological Education Coordinator for the Episcopal Church, to the clergy of the diocese. Thank you, Dr. Crist, for your generosity in being with us today. We look forward to your program.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation to be here. We do live in California. I've worked here, we've lived here since 1992, but we started going to Alaska with a group of people one Christmas. I wanted to go so badly. I couldn't believe I was finally getting to go to Alaska. While on the first trip to Alaska, I broke my elbow in Minto. In Huslia, I got burned lungs because I didn't have the good sense to cover my face when we went into town from the plane on the sled. And when I got home, I just said to my husband, it's too big, it's too dark, it's too cold, I'm in too much pain. And while I was saying that, I knew the Holy Spirit was saying, you will be going back many times. And our first trip was in 2005. So I will tell you that my interactions with the people of the villages, truthfully, is one of the things, probably the most important thing that inspired me to pursue discernment for holy orders, because I had had that calling for almost 6 decades at the time, but I ignored it. I just didn't want to do it. I was married to a priest. I had an idea of what that meant. I didn't really think it was my calling. But after going to Alaska, it was just it was a whole different spirit. So I'm probably your biggest California fan of Alaska. I love Alaska and the people, and I'm really happy to be here today. And I hope at some point maybe to get to see you in person. So we're limited to 45 minutes today, so I'm going to go a little bit fast, but there will be other ways that you can access this in more depth and without cost through Bexley Seabury Seminary. I'll tell you more about that. So today we're off and running. My enrollment, tribal enrollment, is in the Blackfeet Nation of Montana. It's called Amiskapi Pikani. That means Southern Robe People. We don't call ourselves Blackfeet, but since the colonizers did, you might know that if you're in Canada, our cousins are called Blackfoot. But if someone says, I am Blackfeet, it means their family is from Montana. My mother was born on the Canadian border. Before we get started, let's say this prayer together, or you can say it silently if you want to. Creator, we give you thanks for all that you are and all you bring to us for our visit within your creation. In Jesus, you place the gospel in the center of this sacred circle, through which all of creation is related. You show us the way to live a generous and compassionate life. Give us your strength to live together with respect and commitment as we grow in your spirit. For you are God, now and forever. Amen. It is our tradition as Native people to get acquainted with one another by introducing our families and where we came from. So this is my picture celebrating Eucharist at Claremont School of Theology in my Northern Plains regalia. And the women on the right with Brad Hoff in the middle are some of the women I work with in Los Angeles in a talking circle ministry. We're predominantly urban natives. We started about 9 years ago with 20 in the circle, and we now have an active group of 90. And we meet every Tuesday night on Zoom right now. Otherwise, we meet the first Tuesday of every month in person and the third Saturday of every month in person. And these are women who are disenfranchised for the most part from their families because of, guess what? The doctrine of discovery. You'll find out more about that in a little while. So it's a wonderful ministry. It's my connection with Indian country in an urban setting. Some of the women in my family who are Blackfeet, this is the woman on the right. I don't know if you can see the cursor. Her name is Mary Comes by Mistake. Now, she was given that name by the Blackfeet people because she married a Blackfeet man, but she herself is Cree. And the Cree people and the Blackfeet didn't really get along. So the Blackfeet people gave her the nickname of Comes by Mistake because she really didn't belong on their land. But apparently she was a lovely person and was well accepted. And then the women on the right include my grandmother, who's up in the top corner, and all of her sisters, and my great grandmother, or great grandmother rather, Mary over here is my great grandmother. And this woman is named Florence Evelyn Steele. She came from Canada, from Alberta. She was a white woman whose family got involved in trying to stop the fur traders from exploiting the native people by paying for their fur with alcohol, among other things. And so she ended up falling in love with an Indian man and married him. And so our family is Canadian on her side, but Blackfeet on his side, and then on his mother's side, Cree. And then just to make things more interesting, my father came from Copenhagen, Denmark. So I am what you might call a Viking Indian or an Indian Viking of some sort. But at any rate, it's been a wonderful bicultural upbringing, and I've been very blessed to have known the families on both sides culturally. For those of you who haven't had the joy of being at a winter talk, I wanted you to see this because the family is extended within the Episcopal Church. And this picture was taken in 2020 in Washington when we could all get together. And you'll notice some Alaskans. If you look closely in the group, there were 91 people in attendance. This year, when Winter Talk met in January on Zoom, we had over 130 people. Native Episcopalians are not well known, but we have been together for over 400 years. And there's a wonderful book called 400 Years by a Choctaw woman, the first Native missioner in the Episcopal Church, and her name was Awana Anderson. And here are some of the youth. We were gathered on the reservation in August in 2019. We didn't get to meet in 2020, but this was a new lodge. The other one had burned down in North Dakota, and we had a wonderful time there. I wanted to start with one of the things that undergirds, it goes back to the roots of the doctrine of discovery, and that is one of what I call clashing worldviews. A lot of people refer to clashing worldviews. I'm not so sure that I guess they were clashing. We sort of lost out on our end, but I want to explain how that works and a little bit about what that means. If you look at this beautiful canyon photograph, or actually it's an artist's rendering, I believe, you'll see up here on the top of this plateau, a native person on horseback. And then down in the floor of the canyon, you will see 3 cars going along. And I like this because it shows the 2 perspectives of being in that setting. For Native people, we tend to be big picture people. We are very observant because, as you know, our lives depended upon it, still do. As you would know in Alaska, we have to know nature in order to survive. But more than that, having a relationship with the land and with the Creator who made the land is our linkage to holiness. That's how we pray, if you will. It's to be in love with the Creator and all that was created and all who are living creatures, including all the animals, including the plants, including all of the people, of all of the colors of people and all kinds of people. We really do believe that everyone is related. And We pray to the four directions. We have the medicine circle that organizes reality for us. We see the world organized around a circle, not so much in serial fashion. For us, time, for example, is a lot more like a circle than it is a river flowing by. If a river flows by and you miss out on what's going down the river, then you have lost that view. But for us, if you're meant to have that view of what's in the river, it'll come around again. And so you've probably heard people talk about people working on Indian time. You know, it's kind of like, well, the stereotype is we're always late to where we're going because we see time in a different way. It's more like we see opportunities as coming back again. If they're really meant to happen, they come around again. And so it's really a different way of being in the community. And you see this really acted out when you come to gatherings of Native people, Episcopalians included, at Winter Talk. It's like a big homecoming party. People tend to be a little quieter, but it's a big extended family. And we only see each other usually once a year, maybe twice a year. But it's a wonderful gathering. We see the world organized around this sacred circle that brings us all into community. And those of us who are Christians follow Jesus as an old elder brother, a holy one who does walk with us, and we give thanks for the Holy Spirit within us. We often worship with sacred things from the earth like water, plants, feathers, shells. I've noticed, I would call it worship through beading in Alaska. I'm just so in awe of the beadwork that I see on the altars in terms of the frontals. And I know a lot of women down here do a lot of needlepoint for different places in the church. But there, the beadwork is just incredible. We do honor our elders. We pray in song and dance. We do believe the heartbeat of Mother Earth is portrayed in the drum. These are literal things. These are not metaphoric realities for us. We really do have that drum to remind us that Mother Earth is with us. We honor our children as those who will come after us, and we honor and help one another as those who are to care for the future and for all living things while we are alive. In other words, we follow the pathways given to us by Creator. We are Indigenous, we are Christian, and many of us are Episcopalians. Here's an example of how my relatives view the earth. My relatives call these mountains the backbone of Mother Earth. Other people call them the Rocky Mountains, but this is our reservation. It's plains backing up to the mountains and includes Glacier National Park. This is the land of the Amskapi Pikani people in Montana, as I mentioned, given the name Blackfeet by the colonizers. We are the southernmost nation in the confederacy of 4 nations, and in Canada, our cousins are called the Blackfoot people. Our lands once included what is now Glacier National Park. It's a whole story of its own to tell you how the men who were taken back east to sign the papers were promised that the Native people would always have the right to hunt and fish in this beautiful, beautiful land of glaciers and absolutely crystal clear water. Unfortunately, that was not the case. Today, when I go to Glacier National Park, I show my tribal ID card. I don't pay admission to go in, but if I want to hunt or fish there, I'll pay the same price that any of you would pay as non-Native people. This mountain in the background of the 2 warriors, that is called Chief Mountain. That is our cathedral. For the Blackfeet, that is where the traditional men go for their vision quest. And the vision quest is where the Creator reveals the plans for that person. Now, the women have other ways of praying and going through rites of passage, but the men climb that mountain, and it's a piece of work. I know people who have climbed the face of that mountain. The warriors you see in the foreground are made from found objects by some sculptors who live on the reservation. And there's a pair of these warriors at each of the major entrances to the Blackfeet Reservation. Notice that our feathers stand straight up. You can see that in the sculptures here. Our feathers don't lie back like you typically see portrayed in Plains people. Now, if you keep in mind what I've been saying about how Indigenous peoples view the land, you can appreciate how disastrous it was for people to lose their land, but even more to lose their relatives during colonization. The worst massacre for the Blackfeet people is one that took place here on the plains by this river called the Marias River. Some of my relatives died at this place in this massacre. 173 Blackfeet were massacred, literally, and they were asleep when the attack came. Heavy Runner was the chief of our people at the time. I am related to him through marriage. There is a mountain named for Heavy Runner in Glacier National Park, which we consider sacred, but Heavy Runner was killed at this place. Now, you've heard me using the term Indigenous, and a lot of people want to know, well, what does that really mean? The United Nations defined it, and next week you'll hear more about how the United Nations got involved with the doctrine of discovery. But it basically refers to the people who were there pre-invasion, pre-colonial. It's the people who consider themselves distinct from other parts of society that now live on their land. They still honor traditions, and you know this from the native people in Alaska. I've seen, Fish Camp in the summer, for example, has a whole set of traditions and ways of doing things that have gone back to the elders for years and years and years and years. These are holy things. To me, these are forms of worship. So people who are Indigenous are still distinguishable today from practices, from cultural traditions, from regalia that they wear. What we wear, by the way, it's really not called a costume, it's regalia. And I see beautiful, beautiful regalia in Alaska. And the regalia here in the Southwest is, of course, made of fabric because it gets so hot here. And for my regalia, it's kind of in between because we tend to wear blanket dresses and have very heavy shawls that are really hard to wear in Southern California. So I don't get to wear them. But Indigenous people are distinguishable by the culture, the remnants of culture in some cases that still survive. Why do we need to study the doctrine of discovery? Well, we're not going to go into every single reason on this slide, but I do want to show you this next slide because I think it's the most important, and you'll see a little bit more today. Before 1492, we had about 50 million people living in this area. This does include the Americas, but we would say that even in the continental US, there would be at least 10 million. Now, the amount varies, but prior to 1492, this populace was large, it was civilized, it was organized, it took care of itself through feeding itself in a lot of different ways. There was agriculture, there was hunting, there was gathering, and in 1890, so from 1490 rounded off to 1890, 400 years, the population dropped to 249,000 people, give or take. It dropped, it was almost gone. In the Blackfeet Nation, when my grandmother was growing up, my grandmother was born in 1899. She made sure that all of her grandchildren were registered and enrolled in the tribe because at that time it was under 2,000 people. There were only 2,000 people were left of our people in Montana. So she enrolled all of us. And Today, we're about 19,000. So you see, it takes a while to grow back, and we were almost completely eliminated. A population, had it been following the growth trends in Europe, it would have doubled in those 400 years. Instead, it dropped to roughly 249,000. That is how we define genocide. That is how we define genocide. When the people are literally almost killed off. There's no single document known as the Doctrine of Discovery, but I'd like you to listen to these two Native people from the Haudenosaunee people, and then we'll talk a little bit more about them. I'm going to have to. Let's see. Well, I hope you're going to hear them. Let me go.
We always wondered why did they think it was right or just to do it? What they did was, to take our lands and to push us off our lands and to eliminate us as a people. We discovered this doctrine of discovery, and it just kind of made things understandable as to where they got their direction from. When Columbus landed, and he went back and he reported, and they said then, the leaders, the Vatican was the most powerful voice in the world at that time. Papal Bull, 1493, 1 year later. If there are no Christian nations in this new land you have discovered, I declare those lands to be empty. Terra nullius, very old Roman law that had been exercised in Africa, India, Europe. Further, if there are people there and they are not Christians, they do not have a right of title to land. They have only the right of occupancy. From our perspective, the same right as a rabbit running on the ground, or a turkey, or a deer, or a buffalo, or an Indian. They do not have a right of title to land. 1823, Supreme Court Justice John Marshall adjudicating the case, Johnson versus McIntosh. Two white men arguing over Ohio Indian land. He said, "You boys have it all wrong. Don't you understand? This was settled long ago. They don't have a right of title to land." And he moved that principle into U.S. federal law, 1823. The doctrine of discovery, the doctrine of law today. We always
One second.
I think we always
All right. You heard the term terra nullius in that presentation. I use a little bit of humor here, but it wasn't, of course, humorous at the time. Basically, any land not occupied by Christians was considered empty. It was considered not civilized. The people were considered to be part of the flora and fauna. They could live on the land like deer could live on the land, or fish could live in the water, but they could not own the land. Now, that is very serious, because today there are cases in the Oneida people within the last 5 years that cite the doctrine of discovery as a reason that tribal people, that the tribe itself could not sell land independently. So this Johnson versus McIntosh Supreme Court case is still alive and well today, and it goes back to the doctrine of discovery. The doctrine of Christian domination is another way of talking about these historical occurrences. As hard as it is for us to think about it, we gave up freedom for papers that look like this. These are called papal bulls, and you can't quite see it in the photo, but down here at the bottom of the paper is a round gold ball. And so these were referred to as bulls or bulla, because the round fringed piece that hangs at the end was called a bulla. The doctrine of discovery consists of a series of papal bulls that were issued in the late 15th and early 16th centuries. There is no one document called the doctrine of discovery. Rather, it is a philosophy that is religious in nature, that reflects the conviction that dominion was granted by God through the church to Christian European nations, that God gave them the right to seize any land not belonging to a Christian nation and to subjugate its inhabitants. In 1454, this papal bull, called Romanus Pontifex, gave the church's blessing to European nations to colonize Africa and to take slaves into captivity, provided they were non-Christian and that they were not under the colonization of other European nations. This took place 38 years before Columbus came. So slavery was alive and well, with people being taken from Africa long before most of us in this country realize. Pope Nicholas V began this by giving land rights to King Alfonso V of Portugal. These people could be enslaved, and it was perfectly legal. Now, in 1492, Christopher Columbus came on the scene, and his crew went on a journey that changed history forever. They traveled across the Atlantic to the Caribbean, where they met the Taino people, and this artist shows a depiction of that arrival. I don't know if you grew up singing about the 3 ships that Columbus sailed in, but where I grew up, we were forced to learn that song in school, and we sang it every year for Columbus Day. Only 1 year later, after Columbus landed, the bull called the Inter Cetera reaffirmed the papal blessing on colonization processes that Spain and Portugal had in place in Africa. So they were allowed to continue. They were even encouraged to continue to colonize, convert, and enslave the people. And it authorized Spain and Portugal to colonize the newly discovered Americas and the peoples there. Only 1 year later. 2 years later, after Columbus landed, the Treaty of Tordesillas declared that only non-Christian lands could be colonized under the doctrine of discovery. So you see, people were beginning to compete. So if one country had gone in and had colonized a bunch of natives and made them into Christians, then another country could not come and take those lands because they were now occupied, no longer terra nullius. One might ask, well, how did the English get involved? Where did our ancestors as Episcopalians, where did the Anglicans get involved? Enter John Cabot. The patent you see printed here was issued by King Henry VII in England. It gave Cabot permission to claim everything he could, so long as he did not intrude on lands already claimed by the Spanish and the Portuguese. He could investigate, claim, and possess lands unknown to all Christians. The king would receive 1/5 of the value of anything that Cabot found, even though he invested no money of his own in the exploration. This is a picture of Cabot's sailing ship, the Matthew, which he sailed on the eastern coast of Canada in 1497. Well, as time went on, so a couple of centuries, 3 centuries went by, and suddenly we had what was called the Indian problem. And how would the Indian problem get solved? Well, a lot of writing and talking is shown to you in this 12-minute video. So I'm going to take the time to show it to you. And I think that it's very, very helpful to get some of the details of how this all was accomplished.
By the early 19th century, the U.S. was rapidly growing, both in size and power. Land-hungry and ambitious, the new country was also drastically changing its policies towards the Indian nations. And nowhere was this more evident than in the treaties.
The United States' primary interest in treaty making was to acquire Indian land. And so the treaties were used for that purpose, especially as the United States found itself in a position to pretty much dictate the terms of the treaty. And so the treaties morphed from this friendship and reciprocity sort of relationship into a very one-sided thing.
There's almost a mythology about this, that somehow when the Pilgrims arrived, they were dragging land behind them. There was no land brought here. The land here was Native nations. And this is what the United States needed. It's what it wanted. They wanted all of it. They wanted everything.
The greed came in. Well, we have a little tract here now we need a little more. And well, we need to go make another treaty. We didn't understand that eventually those treaty-making processes ended up to the acquisition of all of our ancestral homeland. That land was a part of us. That land helped us be. That land was who we were and who we are.
The command of removal came unexpectedly upon most of us. There was a time that we noticed several overloaded wagons were passing our home, yet we did not grasp the meaning. Then one day, wagons stopped. We were to be taken away and leave our homes, never to return.
To get what they wanted, U.S. officials brokered treaties through any means available. Their tactics were so corrupt that the once trusted treaties became quickly known as bad paper.
There were people at these treaty negotiations who would do anything to get an agreement on the table. And so there was very routinely bribery, individual payments made to tribal leaders. Alcohol would be used to put people in an agreeable frame of mind, and even coercion to say to people, you must sign this agreement or else.
Every means of trickery and fraud was employed against Native nations. The United States would appoint a false leadership, people who had no right to speak for the tribe, and say, you're the leader of this tribe, sign this paper giving away all your land.
As the century progressed, the treaties became more and more lopsided, a far cry from the parallel paths of the Goswenta. Despite appeals from the Indian nations, the U.S. kept on its new trajectory, rationalizing its aggressive actions along the way.
They have neither the intelligence, the industry, the moral habits, nor the desire of improvement. The tribes of Indians inhabiting this country were fierce savages. To leave them in possession of their country was to leave the country a wilderness.
It's important in the great American mythology to describe the Americas as wilderness. Because of its wilderness, then there's really nobody to dispossess. It was okay to come here and prosper and conveniently forget that there were already people and civilizations in place.
At first we had something to eat, but that gave out and we were starving. We came to a slippery elm tree and ate the bark of that. Lots took sick and died.
As Americans successfully pushed the bounds of the frontier, they not only believed that they were destined to take over the land and prosper, they believed that God was the one who put them there to do it.
They believed that it was God's will, that the United States should be a continental nation stretching from the Atlantic to the Pacific. As each wave of immigration would come, they'd move into an area. The United States would then make some sort of arrangement with the tribe to get that land from them. And then more would come, and they'd advance the frontier even further.
The power of manifest destiny, of expansion, of inevitability, of God's providence helped to rally people around not only the idea of Americans as entitled to North America, but rallied them around the idea that Indian people were barriers to civilization and barriers to progress.
No matter how many treaties were signed or how much land they gave to the United States, the Indian was still in the way. This was known as the Indian problem. This so-called problem continued despite a decades-old policy to force Indians to swap their land east of the Mississippi for land west of it. The Indians would then move to those western parts and away from the Americans. This plan was simply called removal.
The Removal Act was the centerpiece of Andrew Jackson's political agenda, and it was very controversial at the time. It was very widely debated. There was lots of discussion across the country, and very many prominent people spoke up against it.
Will the American government steal? Will it lie? Will it kill? I have no desire to see the poor remnants of a once powerful people. The removal bill represents oppression with a vengeance.
The removal process, it was, all right, you've made these treaties. Now, you can have one of two things. You can keep your sovereignty, but you can't keep your land. If you keep your land, then you have to assimilate and no longer be Indian. You will have sovereignty or you have your land. You can't have both.
Across the United States, the Removal Act divided the country. But across the Indian nations, reaction was unanimous.
We are surrounded by white people, and there are encroachments made. What assurances have we that similar ones will not be made on us should we remove to the Mississippi? Look here, Father. Our lands belong to us. We shall keep them. We do not wish to talk to you anymore.
We had already been fighting to keep that land. And sure enough, when the government was coming in there to take us out of that land, we fought even more. But at some point, you have to realize that this fighting is all going to be about death, and death is coming. Then I need to be protecting my family, and I want my children to survive. So we have to endure this removal.
Many of the tribes did choose to accept removal as a means of maintaining the tribal nation. What choice was there? After decades of engagement, they could no longer resist. And so they gave up their lands, they gave up their homes, they gave up their fields and forests, they gave up literally their way of life in order to be able to stay together and be what they were.
We are poor, but we are free. No white man controls our footsteps.
Some try to assimilate to avoid removal. Some were removed completely. But in the end, every nation met the same fate. Every nation had to give up land.
Brothers, you cannot remain where you are now. You have but one remedy within your reach, and that is to remove to the west. May the Great Spirit teach you how to choose.
The loss of land was devastating, and so was the loss of lives. The most famous of these incidents was the Cherokee Nation's Trail of Tears, but there were numerous other trails just as violent and just as crushing.
Everyone had to walk. My baby brother Joel was 4 years old. I was just 8, but I took my turn at carrying him because he could not walk much. I would get so tired I'd think I was going to die, but I would hang on to him. I was so afraid they would kill him. I saw them kill babies who were too big to be carried and would give out.
That really was a road of death. People were falling on the side of the road or being shot or being murdered on the road and being left there. The removal process was done in a way that was not efficient in making people survive.
Of the millions of Indian people that lived before the first colonists arrived, by the end of the 19th century, only 250,000 remained.
The removal of a tribe was certain to destroy all of the things they knew about taking care of themselves, all of their medicines, all of their foods. Everything about them had to change in order to survive. It can only be understood as an act of destruction.
When you move a people from one place to another, when you displace people, when you wrench people from their homelands, wasn't that genocide? We don't make the case that there was genocide. We know there was, yet here we are.
When we were forced to leave our land, we took the fires with us. We took the embers along. Then when we got to Oklahoma, we rekindled the old fire. Old home or new home, it is the same fire.
We have about 3 more slides that I'm looking at my time, and I'm thinking I'm going to hold those until next week to start our work together, because the bishop would like us to have time, and I would like to have time as well, to talk a little bit about our questions or comments that you might have. So let me see if I can stop sharing this. And by next week, I promise I will learn how to control this cursor a little better. Do you have any questions? If you do, maybe just jot them down, and we'll try to deal with them as best we can.
Mary, it's Mark, and just want to make sure one minor point, and that is that we actually are scheduled not next week, but the week following.
Oh, that's right. Yes, it is. I'm sorry.
Just want folks to
Thank
know
you.
that.
Thank you. Yes.
And I think, why don't we do it this way? There are a couple ways you could ask questions, folks. If you want, you can just jot them into the chat, and I'll ask them on your behalf. Or if you want, you could raise your hand, and I believe you have the ability to unmute, and I'll just
Mhm. Mhm. Right. Judy wants to know if we're recording this. I believe we are. Yes. So next week, just so you will know that there's some help coming at the end of this presentation, there will be some discussion of the boarding school movement and how that happened. And there will also be discussion of the youth today and some of the movements that are going on in the way of reconciliation, some within the church. One is the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions that began in Maine, and they're modeled after the ones that took place in South Africa. So our time together will be brief, but we will have an opportunity to talk about some of the positive things. A lot of times presentations like this leave everyone feeling, well, I didn't have anything to do with that. My people didn't have anything to do with it. So what are we supposed to do with it now? Because probably, for example, Malibu, California is not likely to give all the land back to the Tonga people. Probably not going to happen. So what kinds of things can happen? And that'll be part of our exploration in a week after next, in the next session. Not next week, but in 2 weeks. I think another thing you might find interesting if you have time is what was going on in Alaska during this? How did the doctrine of discovery affect Alaska in the part of the state where you're living now? What went on? How did that work? So that might be something of interest too for us to explore a little bit further.
Chip, is your hand up, or are you just resting your hand in a way that might look like that? Okay.
Judith said she would like to know what's happening in what happened in Alaska. Well, that's the homework. So take a few minutes in the next couple of weeks and see what happened in just your area. We will definitely go into that. I wouldn't leave you hanging, but see what happened in your part of Alaska. One of the reasons that the church passed this is because well, I'll put it this way. Brad Hoff and I have done several presentations, various dioceses, as well as a couple of seminaries. And typically when we ask if people knew what the doctrine of discovery meant, it's usually about 10% of the people who put their hand up. Most people have not heard about it. And so what we're doing is just responding to a resolution that was passed at General Convention, at the last General Convention. And it said that all people in the discernment process for ordination will be expected to have at least 4 hours of instruction on the doctrine of discovery. And that's that. The reason for that is not apparent to a lot of people. I've had pushback on that. Why should we do this? This is over and done with. But next week, when you see some of the legal cases, one of which, the most recent, one of my people I respect the most, but a very unpopular decision was made by the Supreme Court, and it was written by Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And so this doctrine of discovery is still very much with us. The other thing, if you like to read, the other thing is that look up epigenetics as a study, epigenetics, because epigenetics is now, it's a science. It's not a, I thought it was like a new age kind of a thing, I didn't really take it seriously. I'm kind of hardcore when I hear things. I really want to know more about them, especially if I'm going to quote them in a presentation. Epigenetics is the chromosomal damage that happens in response to severe trauma, especially trauma that's ongoing. And it is passed on. It can be passed on. And it's kind of like passing on genes for cancer. You can have a lot of cancer of a given type in your family, but maybe you won't get it at all, because the way genes work is they need things to cause them to express themselves. So there could be a predisposition for something that may or may not get expressed. But in our populations of Native people, we're very susceptible to alcoholism. We're very susceptible to doing things that damage our bodies. And we don't seem to have a lot of resistance. And if you've been out, well, I don't want to embarrass any places, but in California, let me tell you, you don't have to go very far to be dealing in LA with natives who are suffering from a lot of problems. I'll keep it at home here. Lots of social services are necessary, because it's not just that bad parenting gets passed on, but the physiology gets passed on that's governed by genes. So the predisposition is there to be involved in things. That's a leftover of the doctrine of discovery. Also, next session that we have, we're going to talk about in a little bit of detail about how the deaths of people in the Americas, Central and South America particularly, destroyed agriculture. And that led to what is called the Little Ice Age. And that's all documented stuff. It's not just stories. So let's see, Chip says, it's interesting and disturbing to think of the Native American displacement, Israelite displacements of the Canaanites, and now Palestinian displacement. Can we talk about that in some format at a later time? Boy, that's a great thing to talk about. I published a paper called Fry Bread in Canaan. And yeah, you're right on target with that, Chip. A lot of discussion there. See, that's kind of where we Episcopalians, well, we Christians, me as a Christian native, people say to me, if you know this happened to your people and it happened in the name of the church, how could you be Christian? Why would you do that? Are you like, it doesn't make sense. Don't you even know your own history? Well, yeah, but then there's this theology, you see, of Jesus, of forgiving our enemies and forgiving what happened. And then that rolls into, reconciliation is appropriate, but what about reconciliation without justice? Can there be justice without paying people for their land? Well, I happen to think, yeah, there can be. I mean, it doesn't replace the land, of course, but are there things that could be done today that make a difference? Yes, there are. And we'll talk about some of those as well. But I hope, Judith Yeah, early childhood trauma is being taught in our villages now by tribal health clinics. Thank God. That's really, really important. And Carolyn, so much to talk about, so much recompense to be made. We could talk for years. Yes, we could. We could. Our goal in the Indigenous Ministries Department for the church is just to get the word on the street, get people talking. It's not indoctrinating, it's just telling the story of what really happened. And I think there are so many things that can be done. Belle, your work, Belle, with the music, I mean, that's a beautiful example of restorative justice or restorative education, honoring the traditional music and even more empowering the youth to be able to play it. It's wonderful. Those are things, see, that can be done. And that's where I think that we want to work together. Did the PB actually say at Winter Talk that by 2050, the Episcopal Church will be dead? And I don't think he said it in quite those words, but everyone and their dog is saying, look at the statistics, the numbers are going down. And so we're dying. Well, you know what? We just have to figure out another way of doing things. We have to think of another way of doing things. I don't believe he said it in those words, but he did talk a bit about, some of the statistical reports that are out. I was telling some people the other day, I work with homeless people. My church is, it's not even, it's called a ministry center. It's not a traditional church. I work with people on the street, people who live in the parks of Riverside, California. I was sent there as a brand new priest, my first Lent. The church, I had to rent the church to get the money to buy the food to give away for the homeless people. And so I didn't really have a church for Ash Wednesday. And so I didn't really know what I was doing that much either as a brand new priest on my own in an environment that I had virtually no training for. So we just did Ash Wednesday on Thursday. You know what? Lightning didn't strike. We had a heck of a good time. I did a lot of teaching. And then I was telling some people yesterday that, well, right now I haven't done Holy Eucharist as a priest since March. However, every Thursday morning, my little group, my little band of mostly still homeless people, because there's not enough housing in California to house everybody. We feed about 100 families every Thursday morning and drive through food giveaways. And I was crabbing to my husband one week about, I wish I could do Eucharist. I really miss getting us around the altar. Then I got to thinking, we are around the altar. We do give food away in the name of Jesus every Thursday morning. I think that's a Eucharistic act. So I think there was a little talk at Winter Talk and in other venues where I go about, you know what, the way we have always done it may just have to change. Maybe that's a message that's coming to us through the Spirit during pandemic. Whoever thought that we'd be doing church online? But I have friends who are doing church online every week, and they got people coming now that don't even live in their state. And you know what? I've been known to sneak off to St. Matthew's Fairbanks on a Sunday morning from little old Southern California and see if I know anybody who's sitting in the pews and listen to the priest and listen to what's going on with the kids when they get down on the floor and act out the story with the little furniture, godly play style. I'm kind of liking that. I can, if I feel like it, I can go to the cathedral in Washington, D.C. or I can check in at little old church down the street. I happen to go to church in my hometown because, as I said, my church is rented. That's one of the ways we get money to feed people, is by just rent the sucker, rent the building. I've got a group of Reformed Church of America that rents it. No, rent it. So we're going to do next Tuesday, we're doing Shrove Tuesday, California style in the backyard under the trees. And we're serving chicken and waffles. Because that's what people want to eat. And if you're working with homeless people, you'll want to serve something that they want to eat. So that's going to be our Shrove Tuesday. And then the next day, because we still don't have permission to really go inside to do much of anything, we'll deliver the ashes. But I don't have permission to impose them because I'm not allowed to touch them and I can't get that close to your face. So, okay, no prob. We're going to get our ashes and we're going to put them in a little baggie, you know, one of those little kind of baggies you put the kids' lunch and candy or whatever in, and we're going to give them out in baggies. But we'll be doing Ash Wednesday and we'll be doing Shrove Tuesday. So did the church die? Well, if you looked at my particular place, you'd think, oh, poor Mary, she doesn't have a church. You know what? I have a community and I have Jesus in the middle. And that is the church. So, you know, maybe when we say the church is dying, maybe it's just the way we've been doing it is going to change. I don't think it'll ever die because we all love the liturgy too much. But you know what? There's be other ways to do liturgy. There'd be other ways to do liturgy. And that's what's really kicking in, I think. And now I'm getting on my soapbox and I'm going to talk too long and it's not even about the doctrine of discovery, except I think it is because it's redemptive from the doctrine of discovery. And so what I think is we have a chance to make it fit the people. So I work in Indigenous theology, and the kind of theology that I'm working in really hard right now is called contextual theology. And guess what? There's a little seminary that wants to get involved. Bexley Seabury, bless their heart. They want to get involved. So we just got a pot full of money from Trinity Street, Wall Street, to build a new master's degree for lay people and those seeking ordination. And it's going to be in leadership and theology. And it's going to have a focus for Native people, but it won't be restricted to Native people. It's going to have a focus for Native people. How cool is that? So I don't think the church is dying, but I think the church has just an enormous possibility ahead of it, you know, to learn from one another, to do what we're doing now. You know, I think that's where the fun's going to be. Gosh, look at this great network right here for sharing ideas. See, I want to know how all of you are doing. How are you doing Ash Wednesday? You know, how is that going to happen when it's minus 40? I told the bishop the other day when my husband and I went to Fred Meyer's and we came outside and we didn't have our parkas all zipped up to our throat and our big hats on, because guess what? It was warm that day. And we looked at Fred Meyer's in Fairbanks up at the big thermometer. It was 10 above. And it did feel warm. That was really fun. So you guys have a great place. Have a great place. Let the doctrine of discovery be what it is. It's real and it does have effects today and they're not cool. However, we can take what they are and we can make something cool from what's there. That's what I believe. Bishop, I think I'm better stop, or you're just going to have to call me Billy Graham's sister or something, and then I'll get all embarrassed.
Okay, Billy Graham's sister. It's good to see you, my sister, and thank you for coming and starting this conversation with us here in Alaska. And yeah, we will look forward to the next part on the 25th of February, same time, same channel.